Hello, welcome to How to Psychology. On this episode, we're going to be talking about psychophysics, a broad group of experiments commonly used in the cognitive sciences. Psychophysics basically means to derive psychological processes from manipulating physical properties, hence psychophysics. Specifically, by manipulating physical properties of a stimulus and then measuring some kind of physical output. For example, reaction time in response to a stimulus or accuracy in response to a stimulus. It's a wonderful sciencey word like astrophysics or quantum physics, but much easier to understand. The term was coined in 1860 by Theodor Gustav Fechner, so I guess that's nice for a pub quiz or something. Today, we'll be looking at what kind of physical properties we might manipulate and how do we measure them. So let's have a look at some examples.
So the first example of a psychophysics task we're going to consider today is the Stroop task. This is a task where colour words appear on the screen, but the ink that the word is written in might be different to the colour of the meaning of the word. So you might get the word purple written in red. And the aim of this task is to try and respond to the colour of the word rather than the linguistic meaning of the word. So if you had the word purple written in red, you would want to make a response of red rather than purple. You can try this at home. We're going to put some of these colour words on the screen and try and say the colour that the word is written in rather than the meaning of the word as quickly as possible. So you're going to see us doing two variations of the Stroop task in the lab today. The first is the version that psychologists would be more likely to do in the lab, where we're just using keys to respond to the different colour words. So for instance, red corresponds to the left arrow key and purple corresponds to the up arrow key. And you have to press the arrow key that corresponds to the word that the colour is written in as quickly as possible. However, this isn't very visually interesting for a video, so we're also doing a second version where you have to touch the piece of fruit or vegetable that is the same colour as the word, rather than pressing a key to respond. So in terms of psychophysics, the physical properties of the stimuli that are being manipulated in this task are whether the meaning of the word matches the physical colour that the word is written in, so whether the two are the same or different. And in psychology, we would say that the properties were either congruent or incongruent. And the outcomes that we're measuring are accuracy and reaction time. So what we normally see in this task is that accuracy is lower when the two properties of the word are different, and reaction times are slower when the two properties of the word are different. So why is it so difficult to say the colour of the word rather than the meaning of the word? This is because there's perceptual interference between the two sources of information, so what the words say versus the colour that they're actually written in. And this causes problems for your brain, and there are two leading theories that are used to explain this effect. The first theory, the speed of processing theory, suggests that the perceptual interference occurs because your brain reads the words much faster than it names the colour. The second theory that's been used to explain the Stroop effect is the selective attention theory, which suggests that it requires more of our attention to name the colour of the words rather than to read the words, because we're so much more used to reading in everyday life than we are naming colours. So reading the words is a lot more of an automatic process than naming the colours is. So although it might look like the two versions of the Stroop task I just did were quite similar, my actual experience of doing those two tasks was quite different, which probably means that the psychological processes that we were capturing were quite different as well. In the task where I had to touch the fruit to match the colour on the screen, I found this much easier because I found that what I was doing was perceptually matching the colour on the screen with the colour of the fruit, so it was a lot more automatic and intuitive. Rather than when I was doing the version of the task where I was pressing keys, I found this a lot more difficult. The different keys, so up, to the side and down, had arbitrary associations with the different colours. So it required a different level of cognitive effort for me to work out what key to press to respond. So this just shows that you have to be very precise in psychophysics tasks, even when thinking about how to respond, because this can subtly change the psychological processes that are used to do the task, and so changes what we measure from the outcomes.
Another classic example of a psychophysics experiment is what we would call a queuing paradigm. Now, in a queuing paradigm, you may have to sit in front of a screen and press a button on the left when something appears in the left, and a button on the right when something appears in the right. Sounds simple enough. But just before the target appears on either side, you get a small preview that might indicate which side the target's going to appear. Just a small, barely perceptible piece of information, but just enough to cue your brain into knowing where the target might appear. Now, this is not going to be particularly groundbreaking news, but targets that are cued are generally responded faster to than targets that are not cued. It seems incredibly obvious and intuitive. Our attention can be captured and directed by barely perceptible pieces of information. Now, we most likely evolved this way when, during hunting in the savannah, for example, you might see a tiny bit of movement out the corner of your eye. And the more successful older versions of ourselves will have been the ones that responded very quickly to that. Is it food, or do I need to run away? Our brains like to maximize their efficiency. They're incredibly lazy. They're like the most efficient way of doing things, and they don't want to have sustained attention at lots of different areas. If GCSE maths taught me anything, it's that paying attention is hard work. This might seem like a bit of a leap to make some kind of judgments about how our brains orientate their attention or pull focus just from reaction time in these kind of experiments, and that's because it is, which is why psychophysics experiments have to be repeated thousands of times with hundreds or thousands of trials and with a lot of participants before we can really pull any kind of meaningful data from it. So there is a reason why psychophysics experiments are so common in cognitive psychology, particularly in the last sort of 20 years. They used to be very difficult to do. You needed to set up something like an oscilloscope to generate waveforms, to get precise timing of stimuli, and when we're talking in the hundredths of a second. But with modern computing, laptops and desktops, it's become incredibly easy to run psychophysics experiments. New programming languages, such as Python or R, help us to run these sort of experiments quickly and easily and pull tons of data from them. Another benefit that you can do is run experiments online. That has been of particular importance during the last year, where we haven't been able to get into a room to test people, or where everyone's carrying some deadly virus or something.
So despite the strengths of psychophysics and the different things that we can learn from doing these kind of experiments, the main limitation is that the outcomes we measure, so reaction times and sometimes also accuracy, are still just a proxy for the psychological processes that are going on. And there are a lot of other things that can affect reaction times and accuracy other than the psychological processes that we're trying to measure. So we can't always be 100% sure that we're getting a pure measure of the psychology that we're trying to capture. For instance, reaction times can be affected by a whole load of different factors, including whether someone had a cup of coffee before they came into the lab, including whether they're concentrating, whether they had a good night's sleep last night, and just individual differences in how fast people are able to process things. So this creates noise around the psychological processes that we're actually trying to measure. Which brings me on to one of the main drawbacks of psychophysics approaches, is that because you have to do so many trials in order to make any meaningful and robust conclusions, people can get really bored doing these tasks. And when people get bored, their accuracy starts to drop off, their reaction times start to get longer, and they start to become fatigued. So it's really important to try and balance the number of trials so that you get the information that you need without completely destroying your results by boring your participants to death, which can be tricky with these kind of tasks.
It might seem like psychophysics is just a way of objectively proving things that we know to be true, or things that feel like very intuitive. Obviously, if something moves in the corner of your eye, you're going to look at it pretty quickly. Or obviously, it's going to be harder to say this one type of color word when you're trying so hard not to read the word that's presented in front of you. And it's that's kind of the point of psychophysics, trying to get some kind of objective measure of some things which are usually very subjective. It's very hard to measure attention and how attention changes under the influence of some stimuli moving out of the corner of your eye. Psychophysics does a very good job of that, but it is important to remember that psychophysics methods relying on reaction time and accuracy are really just a proxy for measuring these actual perceptual processes. We don't know for sure that how quickly I can hit a button on a laptop is indicative of how my brain is processing information as it enters my visual field. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this second episode of How to Psychology. If you're new to the series, we have an episode 1, which was on EEG, and very, very good. You definitely go and check that out. If you're new to Senseless, then oh my god, there's so much stuff for you to go and watch, listen to, read. We do everything. We'll see you guys at the next time. Bye!